let's make this intro super quick. Today we are looking at every single new anime. That is 33 shows from the winter 2025 anime season. Good start to the year. There are no sequels here, no prequels, and no spin-offs, if I can help it. And we are going to be figuring out what I'd like to keep on my watch list, toss into a bin of I will never watch it without massive peer pressure, or hold on to for a few more weeks to see if they have the ability to improve in enjoyment before I have to make my final verdict. So without any further ado, it's time to dive in, ladies, gentlemen, and others. My name is Arcada, and welcome to Glass Reflection. Let's jam. Ameku MD, Doctor Detective. Well, at least we aren't starting off with something completely dog shite. In fact, as long as it sticks to its lane, it's actually quite good. Ameku MD follows a spunky short-stack doctor who is the head of her diagnostic pathology ward in a Japanese hospital. That was a mouthful. Her and her fellow doctor/assistant/Watson are called in to help solve difficult medical diagnoses because she's a super genius or what have you, making this essentially a mystery anime. And boy, do I love mystery anime when, you know, they are actually unique. A big problem that I've had with mystery anime as a genre over the last little while is its over-fascination with Sherlock Holmes, and like the idea of having a protagonist who is super amazing just because, which ends up being just because it's easier to write that way, and we don't need to foreshadow anything when the detective can just waltz in and solve things because he knows the script that the author just gave to them. A lot of anime try to dress that up by making the Sherlock character a young girl, which I like only slightly more, because then I can just call it a moe murder mystery, and that just feels good to say. So now, on the surface, nothing about Ameku MD is all that different from your more common Sherlock-inspired mystery series that we've seen a ton of over the last number of years. However, its wonderful twist, one that I want it to lean into more, is that instead of being about a detective, the protagonist is a doctor. This makes it less like Sherlock and more like House MD. I know that technically House MD is just Sherlock Holmes if he was a doctor, but that slight change makes all the difference, because instead of it being like random everyday occurrences that we find victims in, the problems of any episode all have to stem from a medical diagnosis or a medicinal related problem. Also, because viruses and medical conditions don't necessarily mean that people are going to be dead, a decent amount of victims don't die at all because our team of doctors could solve the problem and everyone can go home, which could be lovingly upbeat. If Ameku goes that route, I think I will enjoy the thing a lot more, even if what I really like about mystery stories, which is being able to solve the mystery before it's revealed, is impossible because I don't know jack about medicine. But this is why it is annoying that Ameku's first major mystery had our characters leave the hospital and instead do traditional mystery solving on site and use just as much medical knowledge as you could expect either Sherlock or some other inspired detective to have. Like, it tossed out its unique element before the first story was even completed. Why? Now, by episode 3, they do stick back to the hospital, and I appreciate that, but I really hope that they stay there, because if they don't, then this is just going to be like so many other mystery stories that I just end up dropping. So for now, this is going on hold. Anyway, I'm falling in love with you. A reverse harem romance set in a very particular year that I won't mention for reasons, but you know, just count back 5 years from today and you'll get there. I'm not confident that I know what is going on here because we have a bit of a time skip, and I feel like this is one of those shows where unless the idea of a reverse harem is appealing to you, you'll need more than one episode to nail down your thoughts. We see our protagonist as an adult, seemingly alone in life, and she has a flashback realization that actually, she did kind of have a pretty dazzling adolescence in high school, though she did not know it at the time, only for us to cut back to that time in her life where she had not one, but 4 male childhood friends who all love her like a sister, possibly even more than that, especially when one of them loves her so much that he decides to prove his love for her by forcing her up against a shower wall and kiss her after they both got drenched. She has given no indication that she wants this, and the boy in question has received little more than like a little brother treatment from her for the entire episode up until this point. But this is kind of what I mean when I say I don't really know what's going on. Is this a series about a girl realizing that she's had an exceptional adolescence that she just didn't capitalize on, only to flash back forward to the future and try to make up for it as an adult? Is this just a basic romance plot that doesn't get fulfilled because she looks like she might be alone in the future? Is it all a bait and switch, and in that future she actually already has a polycule with all 4 guys? I can't tell. And since honestly none of those options are appealing to me, I'm gonna be throwing out this one as well. Banbanba, Banban Vampire. Is this a thing we're doing now? Say goodbye to the overly descriptive light novel titles and hello to titles that are just a sound repeated multiple times. Because after Babanba, Banban Vampire, and Dun Da Dun from last year, I'm having flashbacks to when the weirdest anime title I know was Bobobobo, Bo Bobo. Anyways, this series is about a vampire. He was near mortally injured 10 years back and has resigned himself to working for pennies, cleaning a local bathhouse, and, you know, staying out of the sun. And he's doing all of this for one important reason. His most desired meal is the blood of an 18-year-old virgin male. And the people who run the bathhouse just so happen to have a young son. A son that our vampire friend has so far waited 10 years so that he could grow up, because he wants to feast on him when the kid's 18. But roadblock, this 15-year-old kid has just found himself in love. And while it may be just puppy love and not lead to anything, love is dangerous. Who knows if our young friend can keep his virginity before his 18th birthday, because if he can't, then all of this waiting would be for nothing. So now our vampire needs to stop this boy from getting laid at all costs. That's the gist of the show, and I'm really not joking about that. So because of that, you know, I'm out. I'd like the series a lot better if it didn't keep bringing up the mention of our vampire wanting to suck off this kid when he becomes an adult. Yeah, I realized the phrasing of that. In fact, I'd love it if they didn't bring that sort of content in front of me at all. So let's move on to something else, shall we? Beheneko, the elf girl's cat, is secretly an S-ranked monster. Not technically an isekai since our protagonist is from this same world, but it's still a reincarnation story where a knight gets reborn into the body of a behemoth. A behemoth that is still very young and is just in the form of a small cat. But he is an S-ranked monster. He gets beat up by another S-ranked monster so badly that an elf warrior swoops in and takes pity on what she believes to be a tiny cat, and she makes a pet out of him. So then they go on adventures with one another. Our cat protagonist is doing his best to keep his new master safe, and she is loving him in return. The problem is, well, I really just need to show you.
タマちゃんが大きくなって発情期を迎えたら何されるかわかんないにゃ。強引に押し倒されちゃうかもにゃ。
いや。それがいいじゃない
ですか。
So yeah, I'm out. Bogus Skill Fruitmaster. About that time, I became able to eat unlimited numbers of skill fruits that kill you. A cheat skill isekai, except it's not an isekai, because there are no reincarnations or anything happening. Buddy is just a commoner from this world. But, you know, that line between what is isekai and what is fantasy has become so muddled these days that it's very hard to tell the two of them apart without pushing up your glasses and starting your response with, actually. So in this fantasy world, once people reach a particular age, they are granted the chance to eat from a magical fruit, which will give them one random RPG-inspired skill. Could be mundane, could be extraordinary, but that skill is what your whole life will now revolve around. Because, you know, you can only do well in any profession if you have the related skill. Our protagonist gains the Fruitmaster skill, which he and everybody else assumes that, well, I guess farming is the only life available for him. Until, you know, he realizes that his speciality is in fruit, and that includes the very fruit that gave him his skill in the first place. A skill that now also gives him immunity to all of the poisons made by fruits, including the poison from the skill fruits that kill you if you try to have more than one of them. So now he can basically eat unlimited skill fruits and not die, which also means if he changed his entire diet to skill fruits, he could learn every skill ever if he wanted. At least I think that's how it could go. He doesn't immediately do this. In fact, he stopped after just gaining one additional skill in the first few episodes, so I don't know what his thought process is. But he will end up butting heads with the people within his society that feel like God has chosen only some people to have the best skills because they are the best, and anyone with a lesser skill is just trash, because of course that's going to be the conflict here. The guy also has an orphan girl that he lives with for reasons. He has a sword saint girlfriend who he loves and loves him back, so I'm sure it'll remain mostly upbeat throughout its run. And if you like cheat skill stories, then I guess this could be for you, and if not, well, you can skip it. Like I am. Given the worthless Appraiser class, I'm actually the strongest. Stop me if you've heard this before. Fantasy world where each citizen is given a particular skill by the gods that influences their entire life because it's now their job. I hope you've stopped me at this point because this is literally the last show that we just looked at so far. Society has ranked all of these skills in terms of use, and in this case, our protagonist has been granted the Appraiser skill, which for some reason, his society ranks down near the bottom. I don't understand that personally because in virtually any fantasy world or game I've ever played in, the appraisal skill has always been super useful, and in some cases, absolutely mandatory if you're in an adventuring party. Oh, what is this sword that's giving off a weird aura? I guess I should use it. Shame we don't have someone with the appraisal skill to tell us whether or not it's cursed. But sure, let's say that it's useless, except it's not, because the title even says that it's actually the strongest. But is it really? At first, I figured that this was going to be the normal rigmarole where the protagonist just happens to stumble upon the perfect use case for their abilities that make them stupidly overpowered. But I don't think that that's the case here. Instead, our protagonist gets abandoned by his party to die as a sacrifice so that they can escape a bunch of monsters. He tosses himself off a cliff since he has nothing else to live for, and he ends up crashing into and being saved by Yggdrasil, the world tree, which vanished years ago and was assumed gone, but no, it's actually just hiding out in the depths of this dungeon. He crashes into it, and the world tree has a humanoid, or rather elf-like spirit that represents it, and she is shy as all hell, but she still saves our protagonist's life. Twice. So in this first episode, right, we have yet to see why the appraisal skill specifically is the strongest, and instead, we've just seen that, well, I mean, having the spirit of the literal world tree take an interest in you is very good for your health. And if that's where it keeps going, if it's like the friendships that our protagonist makes is what actually makes him stronger, then that's awesome. The title will be slightly inaccurate, but I'll still take it. If not, though, I will probably end up tossing it. But for the moment, let's then place it on hold. Farmagia. I had to look it up, but Hiro Mashima, the mangaka for Fairy Tail, had little to do with this title beyond being the original character designer for the video game that this anime is based off of. But it does seem like a large portion of the staff for this anime adaptation is identical to the Fairy Tail adaptation. So there are just a bunch of similarities in that respect, which can either be a plus or a minus for you. Your call. The story takes place in a fictional underworld where human-like people exist, and it's their jobs to grow a variety of monsters, not just for increasing their own quality of life, but of course to help in battle. The 5 continents of the underworld were once ruled by a powerful magus, but upon his death, there is a power vacuum, and one of the generals takes it upon himself to be crowned the new magus, and he attempts to punish all of those who don't want to go along with this. Our protagonist is a spunky, easily angered guy named Ten, who is attempting to grow the most powerful monsters so that he could one day become the general himself. But the regime change kind of puts a slight fire under that plan, and instead of continuing to build his skills and monsters slowly, now he has to do it in the midst of a war. I say war though, but it's war in the shonen sense. There's a lot of levity everywhere to make sure that the mood isn't brought down by the actual weight of what is occurring. You know, with people getting randomly tied up after angering their female lord. Or everybody getting hit with a lightning bolt from the old grandpa, and specifically all of the women having their clothes fly off because of said lightning bolt. Levity. I don't have much of a problem with like the world or with the general plot. I'm actually a little tiny bit intrigued by all of that, but it's the characters that I just really don't see myself getting attached to. Despite having no narrative input, Mashima's influence can still be heavily seen on the characters to the point where, you know, since this is a video game adaptation, I feel like everyone is just a palette swap of the Fairy Tail's main cast to a quite depressing degree. I mean, I have no issues with Fairy Tail in general, but I also sometimes, you know, forget that it even exists. Like when I did that whole video ranking first episodes of Shonen, I didn't even think to include Fairy Tail until like a month after the video went up, when I was reorganizing my shelves and I realized that, oh hey, I have the first 50 some odd episodes still in shrink wrap. Needless to say, it might be good and entertaining for a good amount of people, and if it sounds interesting to you, please go check it out. But I'm out. Flower and Asura. My initial thought on this series was, oh hey, Studio Bind! It'll be interesting to see what they do with a slower-paced slice of life series about performing poems, you know, after the high-paced sections of Mushoku Tensei. I do wonder, though, why they chose to animate a slower-paced series about performing poems. And then I found out. Flower and Asura is not just about the vocal side of its characters performing and reciting poems and the like, but rather the visual representation of what those words mean. In just our first episode, we have our protagonist recite a poem to herself on a beach in the rain, but the animation takes this scene to 11 for no real reason, but I am here for it. Largely, the series is about an introverted girl who lives on an island and has to commute to the mainland for school every day. She reads stories and such to the island's children and has developed very good reciting skills because of it. A senpai from her new high school hears one of her performances and decides that she absolutely has to scout her for the school's broadcasting club, and the rest should be history. Well, hopefully. I'm not entirely sure where the plot is going just yet, like what challenges our protagonist will face as she tries to find out parts about herself that she actually enjoys. But if you dig into the staff, you'll find out that this whole thing was written by the same guy who came up with Sound Euphonium. So if you liked that, you should already be watching this. So personally, I am excited to see what our protagonist will face in the future and where the series ultimately ends up going. So I'm keeping this one. From Bureaucrat to Villainess, Dad's been reincarnated. I saw Villainess in the title and I thought to myself, okay, this is gonna be interesting. You see, I don't particularly like the common narrative trope associated with villainous stories, like the being reincarnated into an otome game, or the redoing your life so that you don't get killed or banished for being a terrible person, that sort of thing. But I've also found that despite the fact that I'm not a fan of those narratives, I still end up watching every single one of them because there's always some other really interesting aspect to the series that I absolutely love. And the same thing happens here. So while this series does carry all of the hallmarks of the villainous subgenre, reincarnation into an otome game from their previous world, trying to act like a villainess but failing miserably and instead acting like a model citizen and becoming extremely well liked, the twist here is that our protagonist is not a fan of the otome game in question, as is the norm. Because, like, usually that is the case, where their knowledge of this new world comes from their love of the game. But in this case, our protagonist is a 52-year-old man, and while he has never played an otome game before, he is still a big otaku, and his knowledge about the game comes from him watching his daughter play otome games. So his advantage here is using his overly polite salaryman bureaucrat knowledge to fake his way into acting like nobility while trying desperately to remember all of the things about the game world that he can from the time that he watched his daughter play this game. It's a twist that I find funny because while he does appreciate the genre, it's still not his area of nerd expertise, and he is trying his best to get through everything regardless. And it honestly makes the missteps that he has trying to be a villainess far more believable to me than most of the subgenre's contemporaries. When your protagonist is themselves an otome game fan, I always found it odd when they did not know what was expected of them in the villainous role and how surprised they were when things weren't going how they should. My favorite part of this show so far has of course been the fact that our protagonist likes to make references to nerd culture that is more relevant to his demographic. For example, I actually understood 2 of those references. I needed to look up the 3rd though, so I'm not that old. Not that old. So yeah, I'm keeping this one. Headhunted to Another World, from Salaryman to Big 4. This is just the more distilled idea behind most isekai and reincarnation stories, isn't it? Like, living and working in Japan is either boring or more often stressful and completely unfulfilling. Wouldn't it be great if you just got sent to a fantasy world where everything was better and your skills were utilized properly? That's this show. Our protagonist was a skillful salaryman from Japan who was regularly abused by his bosses and shipped around the world to solve problems without adequate reward. He dies, I think, and gets summoned by the demon lord of this fantasy world to become the 4th of his generals, with the goal of using his unique skills to negotiate either trade or ally agreements with neighboring demon or monster tribes. I do have to give a lot of points to the demon lord here for doing his due diligence. He's not just some bullshit priest or mage summoner who activates a summoning circle like it's a freaking gacha or something, rolling the dice to see what kind of other worlder they're gonna get. He actually has our protagonist protagonist's full resume and work experience on hand pre-summoning and chose to summon our protagonist specifically for his abilities. That's the slight twist on the norm here that I love. I mean, after that, it just kind of devolves into a Civ-like story that's bureaucracy with a side of a hot demon sidekick and 3 other demon generals who will probably end up in a harem-like relationship with him. And, you know, because of all that, I'm leaning towards Toss, but if any more episodes add things to that formula, then maybe I'll keep it for a bit longer. So we're gonna hold it for now. Honey Lemon Soda. I'm not gonna lie, I watched the first episode of this show, but at the time it was late at night and I didn't have time to, write about the things that I thought about it before going to bed because I wanted to actually get a reasonable night's sleep. So I thought to myself, that's okay, I'll just write about it in the morning, only to wake up and not remember a single thing about it. So if that lets you know how much of an impression this show has left on me, then you might be able to take a gander at my thoughts. So after rewatching the first episode, Honey Lemon Soda is about a young high school girl who is extremely shy and only ended up coming to this specific high school because a cute boy with lemon hair who she doesn't know said that it would be a good idea because that's where he's going. That's it. She does go, and he doesn't remember her because why would he? But he's a nice enough dude, and eventually they get talking, and I am sure a relationship will blossom. I mean, I was harsh on it because it just really isn't all that memorable for me, but at the same time, I have seen nothing but praise for it online, so I feel like I'm in some weird bizarro world where I'm just missing something. I mean, I can say there's nothing inherently bad about it, so I wouldn't ever tell somebody to skip it or avoid it for a particular reason. I just don't see myself continuing with it, so yeah, sorry. I'm a noble on the brink of ruin, so I might as well try mastering magic. You might also try developing a harem, at least if the ED is to be believed. So, a reincarnation isekai that forgets the reincarnation part within like 5 minutes because it's not central to the story. It's just, the usual shortcut to explain why the main character acts like someone from Japan despite being in a fantasy world with magic. Okay, so dude belongs to a noble family, a family which, if it doesn't end up doing something notable within this generation, will be stripped of its noble status, which is a thing that apparently happens in this world, and personally I think that's just a dumb rule that was concocted so that the show's title makes sense, but I digress. Our protagonist is a super amazing prodigy at magic, and within a handful of months, or 5 minutes of showtime, whichever sounds more impressive, he learns and masters hundreds of spells to make him the most magically inclined person in the area at age 11? He joins the Hunters Guild to try and gain independence. He gains a party member who he will eventually form a magic contract with, a contract that grants her skills, but also makes it so that she can't deny his orders ever. So she's a female slave who says out loud that she wouldn't mind it if her new master did weird stuff with her. She then also immediately gets her best friend to also form a slave contract with him, and then that girl gets some of her youth back while also being able to make food that heals people now. So yeah, he's developing a harem and has cheat skill magic abilities. If that's what you want, great, no judgment. But I'm out. I'm getting married to a girl I hate in my class. High school comedy romance where the two leads are forced into an arranged marriage by their parents despite the two of them constantly bickering at school. But the first episode alone tells me that they are just massive tsunderes, the both of them. So yeah, by the end of it, I know that they will both be in love and completely happy with the situation. It's just who knows what's gonna happen before they are able to admit all of that. It's probably a good series if that is what you want. I think personally I'm going to put it on hold to see if there is anything else in further episodes that could surprise me, but I'm not holding out a lot of hope for that specifically. I'm living with an otaku NEET Kunoichi. The premise feels like a contradiction, doesn't it? Like the traditional NEET does not go outside. Also, by definition, a NEET is someone who is not in education, employment, or training. And technically, I would argue that our NEET protagonist is actually employed. She's a bodyguard for her now roommate, as he attracts a whole bunch of Yoma, and she protects him and kills all of the Yoma that would otherwise attack him. She gets paid in room, board, food, and heck, he even gives her things from her hobby. It's not traditional employment, I grant you, but neither is being a ninja, so there's that. I mean, this series also has other things too that you'd have to ignore, like, hey, our protagonist has an absolutely bombshell body, but lazes around all day doing nothing but eating junk food and playing video games. There is a limit to good genetics, but also, like, how did this situation come to pass? In the initial scene, it shows her saving our male protagonist for the first time, and then she kind of, like, snake salesmans her way into a roommate situation with him, but, like, what made her that desperate in the first place? We then learn from the crazy psycho lesbian, don't ask, we learn that she is an extremely talented ninja and in line to lead her entire clan. So I guess maybe then you could say that her desire for the NEET lifestyle led her to leave her clan, but then why this guy specifically? Is it just because he said yes? That's what it feels like. Overall, as a NEET-focused comedy, I don't feel like it does anything unique, and it's kind of like only one step away from being a harem series, what with 3 female characters showcased within 2 episodes, even though our protagonist seems to have no romantic interest at all with any of them and just wants platonic company so as to not be lonely. Good enough for some, but personally, not for me. I'm skipping this one. I have a crush at work. This is a nice, upbeat, romantic comedy about 2 people who work an office job, but for one reason or another don't want their work, or more specifically their co-workers, to find out that they are in a relationship. It's not a complicated series, and in fact is actually quite cute. I'm enjoying the lengths that the 2 of them are currently going to hide their feelings in public, despite the narrative throwing curveballs constantly. And heck, I do have to give major points to actually showing that these 2 have a proper relationship. And even sleep together, and not just, holding hands being the furthest thing that they do. So by that metric, I'm extremely impressed. So for now, at least, I'm gonna keep it. I don't know if I'm gonna finish it. We'll see how it goes, but I am enjoying it so far. Quickly though, let's take a break for a moment, give me a chance to collect my thoughts before we continue on to the next section. But also because I wanted to give shoutouts to supporters of this channel over on Patreon, because this video is not sponsored, and the more support that we get over there, the less sponsored Glass Reflection will need at any given time. So an immense thank you, especially to patrons like Ryfen Bonaparte, Omar Showman, Ross Emerson, Hector Montemayor, Aiden, and Siri Yamako. We can't continue this without your support, so however much you are able to help, I am eternally grateful. I left my A-rank party to help my former students reach the dungeon depths. So here we have a fantasy series that pulls the traditional RPG mechanic tropes that have littered isekai, and also the reusable narrative trope about a character who got kicked out of their former party. I mean, I know that the title says I left my A-rank party, but it was far more of a, you can't fire me, I quit sort of thing after he asked for better compensation and got laughed at because his party doesn't understand how much work a support class party member does. But they should know better, because our protagonist belongs to the best class in any class-based system. That's right. He is the Red Mage. Clap, 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 clap. Why choose between casting healing magic or black magic when you can do both? Why choose between magic and swords when you can do both? Why choose anything when you can choose everything? That is the way of the Red Mage. Jack of all trades, master of none, and the best guy to bring on any adventure. Heck, bring 4 of them. Have a good time. I digress. So our protagonist leaves his unappreciated party and ends up hooking up with some rookies that he trained a few years back, now that they have formed a party of their own. The first episode just goes through their attempt to clear their first dungeon, which, ends up being child's play. Not because our protag has a cheat skill, but it's more like bringing a max level character into a low level dungeon. It's easy for him, and that's fine. By the end of the dungeon, they decide they're going to live stream the boss fight to the world, because that's apparently a thing here. Adventuring parties just live stream their progress. I guess that's kind of cool. That might be interesting later. I'm sure his old party will come back into the picture at some point, either to continue to badmouth him for his apparently poor choices, or because his new party will end up becoming super successful and great while they will struggle without him. Because, that's part of the trope. So ignoring the fact that it's not at all that unique narratively for me, I'm still keeping it just so that I can continue to follow the adventures of the Red Mage. And I will not apologize for that. I may be a guild receptionist, but I'll solo any boss to clock out on time. See, this is fine as well. I don't mind using popular tropes of the genre to help get your world started and such, as long as you use that to make something interesting. Here we have a super powerful adventurer who has decided that the best use of her time is not to tackle dungeons that she can do solo when normally you need a full party. No, that's not beneficial to her in the long term. Instead, she wants a stable job as a receptionist at the local guild, because then she gets a steady paycheck, she gets worker benefits, and best of all, her hours are only 9 to 5, so she can leave on time every day, unless there is overtime. Of course. So what causes overtime? Disruptive adventurers who increase the amount of paperwork that the guild needs to process, either by just being shitty to people in general or being terrible at their job so they don't finish off a boss monster. A boss monster who will then continually summon unlimited underlings that need to be taken care of by adventurers, and the paperwork for said missions are handled by the guild, so if she actually wants to clock out on time, she will need to take matters into her own hands and then go bitch slap a boss around so that it causes less paperwork. But guild receptionists aren't allowed to have second jobs, and even her adventurer's card is a fake because a real one would get her fired from her cushy job. So if she wants to keep it, and she does, she needs to keep her adventuring time to a minimum and silence anyone who discovers her secret. All in all, it's a very good take on the dungeon crawling subgenre that I am excited to see more of. Solid keep. I want to escape from princess lessons. What I found odd about this one is that it's listed as a fantasy series. Is it really a fantasy? It's about a noble girl who gets betrothed to the prince, and she desperately wants to not do that because she doesn't want to be a princess. But is this simple act of having a royal family considered fantasy? Like, if you just have a vaguely European 17th, 18th century society, is that considered fantasy? I mean, if you want to get into the nitty-gritty technicality of it, sure it is, because according to the strict definition of the word, all you need is an imaginary world and nothing else to be considered fantasy. But is this really what people think about when they hear that something belongs to the fantasy genre? I don't think so. So this romance drama, as I mentioned, is about the daughter of a duke who has spent her whole life being forced into lessons to become the perfect princess after she was betrothed to the prince at a young age. However, after the prince apparently confirms to her that their engagement is off at a ball when he shows up with a different woman, she is absolutely ecstatic and immediately sets off to move back into the country, much to her brother's dismay. I'm putting this one on hold for the moment because everything points to like the prince either being coerced into this situation and he actually did want our protagonist for a wife and now just has to deal with the knowledge that she never wanted him at all. But if that's where we are going, I'll probably keep it. But I want to see where we're going to go. So that's what we're going to do. Magic Maker: How to Make Magic in Another World. So this is a reincarnation story, but what intrigued me so much about it was that its first episode was done from the POV of the protagonist's sister, which is quite novel, isn't it? Instead of having the reincarnated person doing the whole song and dance that we've seen a bajillion times, asking basic questions about the world, we get the perspective of a young girl from this world wondering why their sibling is so strange and is asking these weird questions. But this fantasy world does not originally have magic, or at least not traditional magic, and it's our protagonist's mission to find some. Like, they've been reincarnated, so they know that there has to be some kind of magic, but how it works and how to use it is hidden and needs to be discovered. So with his sister's help, he seems to be on track to do just that. And eventually, by the end of the first episode, he actually figures out some of it with the help of some fish who can make magical balls of energy appear as part of their courtship dance. He inadvertently then recreates this magic by promising his sister that he will never marry anyone, so that the two of them can be together forever, which is basically like a marriage promise between themselves as siblings. I'm out. Medaka Kuroiwa is impervious to my charms. So, we have a main female character who seems to have some kind of supernatural, but not actually levels of charisma, and from the day she was born, she was the cutest thing around, and that ability trait has completely compounded throughout her entire life, as literally everyone turns their head at her approach, and this has led to her having a particular ego complex about her own personal perfection. Everyone loves her, everyone thinks she's cute and beautiful, but then she hits the brick wall that is our male protagonist, who reacts the complete opposite to what she is used to, and it absolutely sets her off. How dare this guy not worship the ground she walks on? She's not vindictive or stuck up about it. which is nice, but she still ends up frustrated and is going out of her way to target this one guy specifically because she can't stand not being adored by literally everyone. Turns out that the guy is going to end up inheriting a temple, and his religion calls for celibacy. So despite the fact that, yes, like everyone else, he really is down bad for our lead, he can't show it, and he must suppress his impure desires, and thus a comedy was born. I think I'm okay, though. Episode 1 had enough of our female lead literally throwing herself at this guy for me, and, you know, especially since he's supposed to become a monk or something, the end of this is just going to result into either he's not going to do that for some reason just so that the two of them get a happy ending, or he does and the romance just kind of ends, or some loophole comes up. You know, either way, I'm just not invested enough to find out how it goes. So toss. Medalist. This series follows two people, a 26-year-old guy who has massive regrets about the sport of figure skating, which he is passionate about. He's regretting because he didn't get into it until he was about 14, which compared to others who started when they were 5, well, he's behind in skill and development, and he was never able to quite catch up. While trying to apply for a skating job, he meets a young girl named Tsukasa. She's an introvert who also has a massive desire to pursue skating, but she ends up doing it secretly because her mother would just not approve. She has an older sister who apparently skated for a bunch of years, but then an accident while skating cut her own dreams short, and the mother doesn't want that to also happen to the youngest daughter. But with our protagonist's encouragement and know-how, they convince the mother to let the young Tsukasa join the skating club by the end of episode 1, and then they are off to the races. I'm quite curious as to where the series will eventually go. Like, the title leads me to believe that Tsukasa will make some kind of national or even international stage, and since she herself was inspired by what seems to be an Olympic medalist, we might see some interaction between them once Tsukasa gets established enough. The series, I wouldn't say is breaking new ground or anything, but I do really like the level of heart that it has, enough for me to want to continue it. I mean, yeah, the 3D skating in the intro scene makes me tense up a little bit, but it wasn't all that bad, and if it's limited to just the skating, which it seems like it is, I think I can make it through. So we'll see. Momentary Lily. A fun thing happened while watching the first episode of this, in that I gave myself whiplash. Usually, you know, when I boot up a new episode of a show to watch for this video and these types of videos, I pause it immediately for a second just to either let it load, but also to make notes, write down what I'm watching, what episode number it is, and anything I know about it beforehand to keep it all nice and concise. But when I paused it at that first second, I looked at it and thought, well, hey, this actually looks pretty nice. This might be okay. Only to unpause the video and immediately see the Go Hands logo and go, oh no. In this series, all of the environments are in 3D. There is no good shot composition. I feel like I'm watching a budget version of Who Framed Roger Rabbit with all of the animated characters in unrealistic 3D geometry space. Why does this one girl have tits that look like it came from a Dead or Alive game? Why does another have string cheese-like hair done up to make her look like she has cat ears? Why do all of them have such over-the-top personalities that it seems like someone just picked a random aspect about what a girl could act like, turned the dial to 11 and called it a day? I'm not following this one. Pretty much everything from Go Hands, with very few exceptions, has been an acquired taste sort of thing, and I've just never acquired this taste. Toss. OKITSURA. Fell in love with an Okinawan girl, but I just wish I know what she's saying. The title of this one is somewhat self-explanatory, but also possibly inaccurate on purpose. Guy moves to the island of Okinawa, where they have their own distinct culture and such, including an accent and dialect of Japanese that is unique to them and hard to understand for anyone who doesn't come from there. So, you know, coming from a family of Newfoundlanders I can relate. Anyways, he ends up in a love triangle with two girls, one who speaks with an accent as heavy as someone that's been living there for 70 years, and another, more normal girl who can understand the local dialect, but speaks normally and acts as a translator for our protagonist. The thing is, our normal girl is deeply infatuated with our protagonist, but if the first episode and the show's title is anything to go by, he does not reciprocate that, and instead is in love with the hard-to-understand girl, which I'm fine with, but I'm also confused because more or less the entire of episode 1 revolved around this apparent third wheel of a character and her feelings. She was also like the POV character for half the episode, so why is the title pointing to one romance, but the episode itself ignores that and shows something else? It's really weird. I'm keeping it anyways because I'm fascinated by that, but also the show likes to utilize a lot of reference comedy, which is my jam. In episode 1 alone, we got a Zombieland Saga shoutout and a full Evangelion parody, which was very amusing to me. So for the time being, I'm keeping this, but I might drop it if we can't figure out who likes who pretty soon and where that's eventually gonna go. Possibly the greatest alchemist of all time. Stop me if you've heard this before. Guy gets isekai'd into a fantasy world, except he wasn't supposed to. Others were, but he got dragged along by the spell. The goddess who is partially responsible for the situation is very apologetic and allows him to be reborn as a resident of the world within her control. She allows him to pick out a special skill to help him live an easier life, and he chooses alchemy, which apparently is a trash skill, but whatever, it's his choice, right? Plot twist. Turns out alchemy is actually a completely broken skill because you can just make whatever you want with materials and take materials from wherever. Even enemies in combat. He'll eventually gain a harem of at least, 4 other girls? 5 if we include the goddess herself, and who knows how many other side characters that the show will inevitably throw at him. And he'll probably become a super craftsman and a merchant and live as the most powerful person in this world. I mean, you just remove possibly from the show's title, okay? Because episode 1 just makes it a statement of fact. And you know what? I'm going to keep this one on my watch list, despite a level of disdain that exists within my voice right now, because everyone needs a little bit of trash in their diet every once in a while to remind themselves of the better things that exist. Even if that trash is a show where the protagonist makes his millions by selling toilets and is on track to have that "should I buy a slave?" talk by episode 3. So that might be it for me, but I don't have high hopes for it actually staying on my watch list till the end of the season. We'll have to see. Promise of Wizard. Isekai/reverse harem. A woman is taken into a fantasy world by a magical elevator, which I will admit, that's new and kind of nice. Turns out that somehow she was selected to be this fantasy world's new great sage after the old one died, possibly? Not a lot of that was made clear in the first episode, but what we do learn is that this world has a bunch of magic users known as wizards, who don't really have any loyalty to the governing body, which, pisses off the local governing body of lords, because they don't like not controlling things. As soon as she arrives, our protagonist is confronted by a local lord who wants to force her to come with him for her protection, but then the wizards show up and they also want her to use her powers for their own goals. And she ends up going with them because A, they're a bunch of hot boys, but also because instead of forcing her to follow them, they at least ask her for their assistance, even with the knowledge that they're being selfish by doing so. I'm not really sure what else is going on or why I want to care, so yeah, personally I'm tossing it, but you do you. Sakamoto Days. Oh, hello, Shonen Jump. What do you have for us this time? A former assassin who fell in love with a cashier at the local variety store? He gave up killing to keep her happy, but that life keeps coming back because no one truly leaves? Wow. What else do we have? A former associate who can read minds? A female martial artist who can make pork buns? Well, I'm obviously keeping this one because it basically answers the question of what if John Wick, but fat middle-aged Japanese man whose wife never dies. And also, this is a comedy for some reason, and it's perfect for that. So yeah, this is a funny action comedy about a former assassin who is passing his time by selling cup ramen to locals, while constantly having a rogues gallery of assassins coming after him for various reasons. You should be watching this. It's good. Sorairo Utility. Golf. Do you like golf? You might like this if you like golf. Cute girls playing golf. Golf. Yes. I'm okay. Tasokare Hotel. Oh man, this show just hits the right amount of elements to get me interested from the get-go. Tasokare Hotel exists in a space between life and death where souls go when they are lost. It's not a purgatory in the traditional sense, and despite the show's similarities with, Death Parade, those who come here are not here to be judged. In fact, they might still be alive even. Their soul has just forgotten that and needs to be reminded of who they are and where home is so that they can go back to it. Our protagonist starts off as one such patron of a hotel, disoriented and not knowing who she herself is, before eventually remembering her name and her face, but not what happened to her. That's a mystery. So until she does remember, she decides to join the staff of the hotel as a maid, not only to stave off boredom, but also because she finds the patrons within the hotel to be interesting. Everyone comes in with a weird face and has a story to them that even they don't know. And she seems to take great delight in digging around in these people's lives while they attempt to remember who they are. And since this actually helps the souls in question, nobody seems to mind, which is why the series is fascinating for me. Like, the setting itself just has a level of mystery here that you can, well, enough so that you can and probably should call it a mystery show, but it's not mystery like a detective solving crime sort of thing, which I like. It's quite nice. It's more like a therapy session for the characters as they try to discover who they are, why they are here, and if they even have a home to go back to. I feel like this might end up being one of my favorites for the season, so yeah, I'm keeping it. The daily life of a middle-aged online shopper in another world. Stop me if you've heard this before. Guy dies from overwork and wakes up in a fantasy world. But would you take a look at that? He gets the ability to make online orders from the modern real world and have them delivered to his fantasy item box dimension. He can also sell fantasy world items directly for instant cash and then use that to buy cheap modern things to sell in the fantasy world for massive profit. No, seriously, I feel like this is the 5th show that I've watched with this general premise in the last 5 years, and I can't say that there is anything particularly unique about this particular version of the story. Like, even the OP shows us that this guy is just gonna flat out buy a car from his magic store eventually, but probably not bother to explain how he plans to get fuel for the thing, unless the magic store will just sell him a barrel of gas for reasons. I mean, the car could also be electric, but then he would need to introduce electricity to this fantasy world, which has its own slew of complications that I doubt the show will attempt to talk about or even answer. It's light, it's calming, and if you haven't seen this formula before, you might find it unique enough to be worth watching, but for me, yeah, I'm gonna pass. The Red Ranger becomes an adventurer in another world. I mean, points for originality, I guess, but it fails a particular test of mine that's probably not accurate, but I like to use it anyway. In my mind, the confidence of any creator towards their work is represented by how quickly a female character is introduced with an outfit that's more scandalous than lingerie, because fan service. So, take the most generic Super Sentai team ever, and then just yoink the Aki Ranger into a fantasy world. Toss in a powerful sorceress who just does not understand how any of this ranger tech works, because why would she? And she questions it in a fourth wall breaking sort of way, like, why do all of your enemies just explode? And for that matter, why is there an explosion when you change outfits? The highs here are with its comedy and how it's like sort of trying to critique the Super Sentai genre as it moves along, but to me, that's kind of its only highs. Our Red Ranger did not seem to come from a particularly good Sentai series, it looks like. Heck, I would have taken it a lot more if he came from an unofficial Sentai series. That would have been great. But no, this Sentai team is all about working off of the power of friendship and their relationships. That's what powers them, instead of, animals, dinosaurs, spiritual entities, the turbo in a car. Like, no, really, all of his attacks are named after relationship statuses. I don't know what that means in the grand scheme of things, but I didn't find it funny. Also, like, for a Super Sentai team to be all around friendship, they sort of just abandon the Red Ranger at the start and be like, YOLO, we're leaving with the Megazord. Have fun fighting the final boss by yourself. Like, that's not what I would think a Sentai team built around friendship would do. I want to give it a fair shot, but I just don't have my hopes up for it. So for the moment, I'm gonna put it on hold. Übel Blatt, a fantasy series. We got an almost cheat-skilled protagonist who is trying to smuggle his way into a new country where there are some legendary 7 heroes or something. There's also backstory about 4 other guys who were traitors to the heroes. Possibly the heroes are dead. Maybe our protagonist is a reincarnation of one of those dead heroes and wants revenge. I'm not entirely sure. There came a point where I just kind of checked myself out, probably around the time where our protagonist had God mode turned on during battle. Sure, there was a moment there where it looked like he was dead, but that's only because apparently his cheat skill powers only work in the moonlight or something? I don't know. If you're a 14-year-old edgelord or something, you're gonna love this. But personally, I'm not invested enough to continue it, so I'm tossing it. Welcome to Japan, Miss Elf. The title kind of gives this away, but this is a reverse isekai. So we have a dude where, since he was a kid, he goes to bed every night, and while he is sleeping, he dreams of a fantasy world with swords, sorcery, elves, and dragons. He keeps visiting the same dream fantasy world every night into adulthood, until one day, while in the dream world, he and his elf companion are attacked by a dragon, and instead of dying, he just wakes up, because it's a dream, right? Okay. But unlike every other time when he would just wake up, this time he wakes up and his elven companion is naked with him in the bed. Scandalous. So now he gets to show this several hundred-year-old elf the world of Japan and possibly return her to her own world? But even if he does that, will she become like a traveler like him? Will they alternate between the worlds? Why do I want to believe that the black-haired girl from the OP and ED and key art is just the humanoid version of the dragon that killed him? And what does all of this mean? I mean, all of this to say I'm quite interested in the questions that the show is asking, and I'm all for sticking around for the answers, so I'm gonna keep it, but we'll see how it goes with, the answers to these questions. ZENSHU. And we end off our video with the final series about a woman who is isekai'd into a world of a fantasy film from Earth. She dies from overwork as she was an anime director, but couldn't for the life of her draw up a storyboard about first love because she's been single all her life. The stress of that catches up with her, she ends up eating some expired seafood, and away she gets sent. But in this fantasy world, in times of stress, and apparently only in times of stress, she gains the magical power to just draw whatever she wants and change the outcome of this world's narrative. And I do mean whatever she wants. Like, oh, we have an entire army to defeat. Well, what about Hideaki Anno's laser monster from Nausicaa? That'd be good. Episode 2, giant air battle with flying monsters. Well, Etano Circus coming right up. That last part is even more hilarious when you find out that they actually got Ichiro Etano to do the storyboards for the part where they reference his own work. That must have been surreal as all heck. So what does this all mean? I don't know exactly. The enjoyment that I am getting from this is mostly like bureaucracy villainess, like the references, the connections that this anime nerd is making through her drawings to save this fantasy world. The problem is I don't have a connection to that world, and even after 2 episodes, I don't really see myself forming that connection. Because like between the mascot character, the knight who is sometimes a dick, and not Deedlit, I keep wishing for like 90% of the episode that I was instead watching the anime that inspired all of this instead of, this. Did you know that the vast majority of Macross just became available on streaming recently? I mean, there's a lot of Macross I haven't watched, and if I wanted to watch an Etano Circus, might as well go and watch the OG. I will say there is enough difference here from the usual isekai formula that I am intrigued, but also, like I mentioned, I'm not completely sold on the characters themselves. The world is fine, the animation and music are peak, but for me, if I don't care about the characters, about what they're trying to do, about their story, I mean, if I just wanted to watch pretty animation, I'd be better off waiting until the end of the season and watching everything cut together as a clip show. The idea of the show is great. There is a lot of promise here. And I think that there is a lot for me to like. I'm just not fully on board yet. I'd like to get there. I want to get there. But I'm gonna have to put it on hold for now. But that's it for our show today. With any luck, you now have a greater amount of knowledge about what is airing this season and what you yourself will want to watch. If possible, I'm going to try and find a way to link in the description all of the places where you can watch these shows for legal streaming. But if that fails, I mean, just Google the show name and add streaming. It should not be that difficult. So subscribe if you haven't, hit the like button if you enjoyed the video, and until next time, whether that is later this week, and it might be, or next month, watch more anime and stay frosty.